All right, I'm back. I'm ready to do element number 3, the final element of retaliation. It's kind of topical. It's been around a lot this week. And that is causal connection. So if you haven't watched the retaliation elements, the other elements, they're in a retaliation elements playlist. There are 3 elements to a retaliation claim: protected activity, an adverse action, and a causal connection between the two. Please excuse this hoodie. I know it looks stupid over this dress. It's very cold in my house. So on a post the other day, I can't even remember what it was about, someone made a comment and said, I'm starting to realize that causation is everything. And in civil law, it truly is. In civil law, oftentimes, sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's like, you hit me with your car and you broke my leg. Like, that causation is not difficult to prove. But when you get into discrimination claims and you get into business disputes where there's lots of things happening and lots of people and lots of stuff going on around you, sometimes that causal connection can be really difficult. You can easily prove that the defendants did something bad, even something that violates the law. And you can easily prove that you suffered some sort of injury or damage because of it. But the hard part is linking the two. Now, under Title VII, the federal EEO law, the law is very clear and has been since like the early 2010s in a big Supreme Court case that for Title VII retaliation, it is but for causation. And that means that to make that causal connection, a plaintiff has to show that none of the adverse action would have happened had they not engaged in the protected activity. In other words, if there's any other reason or justification for the adverse actions other than the protected activity, you don't have a causal connection. So how do people prove a causal connection in a Title VII or discrimination retaliation case? Well, you'd be surprised at how often people admit that they did it. I mean, I can think off the top of my head in the last 4 years of 2 different supervisors who were found responsible for or had someone complain about them being racist. And then they demoted somebody or fired them or yelled at them or whatever. And when we went to them and we're like, why'd you do that? They're like, because they were talking shit about me. I'm not racist. And you have to say, like, dude, that's illegal. Sometimes people just don't know. Sometimes they just don't care. So if it's admitted, then obviously that makes it really easy. I don't think that's going to happen here. And if that doesn't happen, then you look at all of the other factors. You have to put this puzzle together to make a link between the protected activity and the adverse action. And the top number 1 factor that courts will look to when determining that connection is time. So the case law calls it temporal proximity, which is just a fancy way of saying how long has it been between the two, right? So the law says if they happen really close in time, then obviously you can make the leap, you can make the presumption that they're related. If I work for you for 6 months and we never have a problem, and then I go and complain about you and say you're sexually harassing me, and 4 days later I get fired, you can draw a causal connection between the two, right? But the further apart in time, the protected thing is from the adverse, not in the camera, the adverse thing, the harder it gets. Now, typically under the federal law, sort of the general sort of parentheticals where inside is most likely a connection and outside is most likely not, is 3 months. It's 90 days. So if it's within 90 days, it's like, okay, then probably did. You're going to have to disprove, right? The burden's going to be on the defendant to be like, why were these so close together? If it's outside of 90 days, then it's like, well, now you're going to have to prove why those things are connected. It becomes more of the plaintiff's burden to show why would they wait 3+ months to retaliate against you? So in this case, time is the number 1 enemy for Blake Lively, because remember that the protected activity for purposes of her retaliation claim is the internal sexual harassment complaints that she claims she made while filming in May, I believe, May and June, early June maybe, of 2023. And she claims that the adverse actions didn't start happening until August of 2024. Because that's when she's got these messages saying that they hired Jed Wallace. So that is more than a year later. So the temporal proximity is bad for her, right? Why would they wait so long? Now, I know there's an answer to that. They'd wait so long because they had a movie and they didn't want to fuck with the star of the movie. But from a legal standpoint, the fact that they happen so far apart already creates an obstacle for her. Even if we were to assume that that 17-point list is protected activity, even though I don't think it is, that's still 8 months. And 8 months is way outside of that 90-day scope where the law considers, yeah, they're probably connected. It doesn't mean she cannot prove it, but it means that she is going to have to make that case on her own. The time itself will not make any of the case for her. And then you look at all the circumstantial evidence around it, right? You look about conversations that people had. And mainly the defense to causation, well, first of all, it's her burden to prove. But the main defense is legitimate, non-discriminatory business reasons. That's the defense to most discrimination claims, is if you took action, if the adverse actions were legitimate, non-discriminatory business reasons, then they're not retaliation and they're not discrimination. So I imagine what the Baldoni people are going to say is, yes, in August, we had the legitimate, non-discriminatory business reason of having to counter all the information that she was putting out there and to set the record straight about who did what on this movie when he showed up at the premiere and then he had to go to the basement. This is them talking, and had to go to the basement and everyone noticed, like, what's up with these two, right? That is not retaliation for sexual harassment. That is now arguably a legitimate, non-discriminatory business reason. And that's going to probably be their main argument. So real quickly, this is a good TikTok law school exercise. Go through and think of anything that could have caused the 3 types of damages she's claiming for retaliation other than her alleged protected activity. I mean, I did this in like 10 seconds, and here's what I came up with. You guys tell me more. Okay, her emotional damages. She claims she was really emotionally distressed by this, right? What if she had marriage problems? What if she had postpartum depression? What if she auditioned for a part in a movie and didn't get it? Any of those could be used to break the link between the protected activity and the adverse action. You weren't having emotional problems because people didn't like you on the internet because we hired Jed Wallace. You were having emotional problems because your career sucked because you tanked an audition. I'm just making stuff up. In terms of reputation, this one, is pretty obvious too. She has to prove that the fact that their motivation for hiring Jed Wallace and doing what she says Jed Wallace did was that she had filed sexual harassment claims in the workplace. If it was for any other reason, there is no causal connection. Okay? So to the extent that she suffered reputational damage, she has to prove that it was caused by the fact that she complained about sexual harassment. First of all, they don't even say that they did a smear campaign. But even if they did, there are plenty of other things that could have caused the problems that she ended up having on social media and on the internet. The algorithms. Of course, maybe her own actions to some degree. Organic content. I mean, the biggest part of this claim is going to be everyone's going to have battling experts about how you can tell organic content from non-organic content, is my suspicion. But think about all of the things that could break that chain between complaining about sexual harassment in May of 2023 and a smear campaign in August of 2024. And then finally, her biggest category of damages, which is Blake Brown not launching as well as she wanted it to. I mean, this one is just, it's almost too easy, right? There are so many things that affect an initial launch of a product. I mean, this is just what I came down eating while I was eating a Jimmy John's sandwich. The initial projections of what she was going to make were faulty. You can just attack the initial projections. Those were never right in the first place. The packaging sucked. The reviews were bad. People stopped going to Target because they were mad about them giving money to Trump. The economy sucked. People didn't have time for luxury products. There's a saturated market in celebrity beauty brands. All of those things break the chain between the protected activity and the adverse action because something else caused the damage. One last thing. Apparently the FEHA law that's also part of this lawsuit, you only have to prove a substantial motivating factor for retaliation causation. So if little girl attorney, if you're on here and you can explain that to us, I'd love to know the difference.